Good evening, Dan Bandor here again. I figured I would change the location of our little talks here. The living room, I mean, it worked, but it was kind of, just very stark in the background. So this is a little corner of my living room that I kind of set aside for all of my books. I don't have very many, but I don't know, one day I hope to have like a full library. That would be awesome. So there's a few topics that I want to talk to you about today, about what my plans are in case I do get elected for president. But before we do that, I'm going to try to start each video with a little introduction, a little something about me, so that way you guys can, eventually get to know me. And so today, something that I would like to share is I absolutely love Dr. Pepper. Seriously. So that is here to keep me hydrated. Granted, I'm not going to be talking for very long, but you never know. So, the topics that I would like to talk about today. So as we discussed in the last video, I do want to take a lot of the power of the government and give that back over to the states. I know that I repeated myself a lot, but it was really just to drive that home. So some of the first questions that I think would be asked once that does happen is what happens to taxes, right? So granted, this is going to take a little bit of investigation. I don't have all of the numbers yet, but what I think is a fair estimate for the federal tax once we separate all the powers out, the federal government will go to a flat tax. That means if you make $1,000 a year, if you make $1 million a year, you pay the same percentage of your earnings of that year, right? So I think that a flat tax is actually the most fair, because if you make a little bit of money, you pay a little bit. If you make a lot of money, you pay a lot more than, say, the person who makes a little bit of money, but you're still paying the same rate. So it's equal. I mean, the amounts aren't exactly equal, but the percentage is. So what I've kind of been thinking about as far as what the actual tax percentage should be is a 10% minimum. So every year, no matter what happens, 10% every year goes to the federal government. And then in times of war, or if we need, for some reason, like if we're trying to pay off the national debt or something like that, the federal tax rate will be capped at 15%, also a flat rate. And so I think with this, it kind of sets the tone for what other states should follow. Now, granted, they will be able to assign their own taxes, so I'm sure that states like California would boost their taxes up to 70% for the highest owners, or the highest earners, I should say, and then probably 10% or less for the ones who make the least. I think that other states, more moderate states, would probably pick a more general fair tax rate. So I'm guessing probably around 20-25% would be their tax rate. And then of course, if they choose to adjust up and down based on how much you earn, that would be within their rights to do so. So with that, tax rates would be fixed at a minimum of 10% and at a maximum of 15%. Now, as far as debating like what it's going to be for that particular year, I don't know if we should make that like an annual thing, or if that should be included in the budget. That has to be approved every year, of course. Or if that should be something like where it'll be 5 or 10% for 5 years, and then at 5 years we decide to up it to 12% or something like that, and then that'll hold for 5 years. So it's something to be debated. But for what I would like to see, if I do become president, is something like that. All right, so the next topic that I would like to talk about is our military. Now, I am a veteran. I served in the United States Marine Corps. I did one tour in Iraq. I spent most of my time overseas. I did live in Japan for 2 years, and then I came back here for the remaining of my original term. And then once I got out, I was still in inactive reserve, so they called me back, and from there I went to Iraq. So that took about a year. Not in Iraq the whole year, but I think the time in Iraq was 6 or 7 months. and then the rest of the time was either training or standby. And that's kind of the way it is in the military a lot, is hurry up and wait. If you've ever been in the military, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So that's my experience with the military. Now, granted, I was enlisted. I got out as a corporal, honorably discharged, both times actually. And so while I wasn't like a general, like directing troops on the battlefield or anything like that, I do have an idea of what it's like to be in a combat zone. Now, granted, I was never in any, I wasn't in the line of fire. They kind of stuck me in a command center because that's what I was good at and what I was trained for. So I spent most of my time in relative safety. Now, granted, this is still Iraq, so you never know from day to day. Had to walk to and from, my workplace. I think it was like 3/4 of a mile, in full gear. So that's Kevlar helmet, body armor with all the armor, whatever. I don't know what they're called, the little patches that fit into the actual vest itself. And then with my M16 and 2 fully loaded magazines. And every day I had to walk, and granted, I worked the night shift, so in the day it was starting to get hot, but not quite as hot as it would be like in the middle of the day. So I'd say that my walks were usually anywhere between 90 and 110 degrees. And so that's in the morning, and then coming back in the evening. Well, not really evening, it would be night at that time, but either way. So that is my experience. And something that I agree with Tulsi Gabbard is that we should not be having these regime change wars. I think that we went into the Middle East not really understanding their culture or why they were in the conflicts that they were. And I think going in there without that knowledge and without doing that research ahead of time, I think it didn't really help. I think us being there only exacerbated the situation, and they've been in general conflicts for thousands of years there. So, I mean, this is really nothing new to them, but for us it was. And, I understand why we went there. I mean, we got attacked on 9/11, so, obviously we retaliate. I don't think that was necessarily in error. However, staying there as long as we did was. I understand that we still have troops there. I know that President Trump just called back our troops who are helping the Kurds. There's a lot of history with them as well. And a lot of people are, kind of mad that we're abandoning our allies and everything like that. But the thing is that the Kurds, they want what they want, and they will use and befriend anyone who will help them get it. Now, that's not a bad thing, all right? I mean, it's good to know what you wanted to go for it. But to say that the Kurds were our allies, as Turkey is like an actual ally, to say that they were allies like that, I think is misrepresentation. So I can understand why that President Trump wanted to pull out. I agree with him. And honestly, I think that we should probably pull even further out of the Middle East. And then as far as stationing troops in the future, I think that we should have an agreement to where we will only post troops in allied countries, like literally in paper allied countries, and only at their request, right? I don't want to have an ally in Turkey and then station 50,000 troops there because we can, right? I think that it should be something that should be discussed and agreed on by both parties. Now, with that being said, I don't think that we should, because with Iraq, right? I don't believe that we're official allies with them. I know that we were helping them, but I think stationing our troops in that country when, we weren't allies, and obviously the people didn't want us to be there. I mean, some did. Most didn't. I think that was a mistake as well. So with that, now you would think that with this it would call for a reduction in our forces. I'm not really for that. I'm not really for an increase in our forces either. I think that we should kind of maintain a status quo, and then keep training people. And I think the good thing about the military is it is, now granted we ask a lot of our service members when they do join up, but it is a good opportunity, especially for young kids like me, to learn things like responsibility and following rules, getting out of bed, making your bed, dressing correctly, making sure you look right, and just the structure in the military I think is an excellent thing, and I would advise most people to join the military if they can. I understand that not everyone can join. There are reasons for that. I understand those reasons, especially having been in Iraq. But I mean, you can join the military and not be like a combat, force, right? So you could do like administrative, clerical things like that. I mean, there's all kinds of jobs in the Marine Corps, and the Army, Navy, whatever. So I'm not for a reduction in force. I'm not for an increase in force. What I would do is I would ask that the heads of each of the military branches set forth sort of like a request for funds. And I'm pretty sure they do something like this already. But it would be something official, written in paper. It's like, here's how much we requested this year or this last year. This is what we did with it. This is the good, the bad, whatever. This is how much we're requesting for the next year. And I think with that, if we can get those ahead of time, like maybe a year ahead of time, that'll help us decide where we need our tax rate to go. So let's say that for whatever reason, we need to like bring our forces back up to, a combat standard. In that case, you need a little extra money for that. So we would, bump the tax rate up, a 1% or 2%, provided we don't go over 15%, that would be a hard cap. And then we can give our military what they need to do their job. And in return, the military does a lot for our economy too. Now, I'm not talking just the war machine, because I think it leaves kind of a bad taste in my mouth. I mean, I understand why it's necessary, but at the same time, I'm not 100% okay with it. But apart from that, I mean, when you get veterans out into the workforce, from my experience and having worked in a lot of places and working with people who were veterans versus people who were just civilians out of college or out of high school in some cases, there's just an amount of respect, responsibility that you get with the veterans that you don't get with other people. And I think it's because of that training, because of that structure. And I think having people join the military is actually really, really good for our economy and for the workforce. I understand that a lot of Fortune 500 companies are headed by veterans, and it's this structure that you get that helps them figure out what they need to do in order to make a business grow, thrive, and become successful. So yeah, so that's how I am. That's how I feel with the military. So we've covered taxes, we've covered military. Something else that I kind of want to cover, this is a bit of a touchy subject, but the media. So especially in the past few years, it's become quite apparent that a lot of the people in the media are just, they lie. Or they take things that are technically true and then they twist them around so it seems like it's saying something else. And I think it's not good. So now I understand that the press is protected by the First Amendment. I am not aiming to change that at all. If anything, I would want us, like I said in the previous video, I want us to go back to being what the Constitution originally was meant to be. And so I would maintain the freedom of the press, the freedom of speech, religion, all of that, absolutely 100%. So I do not want to infringe on that at all. But something that we can do, and I know that some people are doing that already, they have a sort of third-party rating system. And then based on what they think, then they'll rate a media company as they lean left, lean right, they're centered, unbiased, extra biased, all those kinds of things. And I think I actually kind of got this idea from the way that our government was or is structured. So we have an executive branch, we have a legislative branch, and we have a judicial branch, right? Now each of these are kind of checks and balances to each other, and it helps the country and the government in general make it so we know one branch has absolute power. So I know that we're kind of having a struggle with that lately, with Trump and the House of Representatives especially. So they're kind of having a tug of war right now, and I think it's not good for our country. But the fact that you have 3 different places, each with their own power and each acting together to do something, is how I came up with this rating system. So, like our government, the rating system would come from 3 places. The first would be from a panel within the government, and then they would analyze each media thing and say, okay, are they unbiased? Are they biased? If they are biased, are they biased towards the Democrats? Are they biased towards the Republicans? Are they just way out there? Another thing is, how truthful are they, right? Are they representing facts like in the way that they are meant to be represented, or are they twisting them to suit a narrative, right? So the government would be the source of one of these meters. The second one would be from their peers, right? So other media companies would rate their competitors, their peers, however you want to think of that, and so then they would give their rating as well. And then finally, the last rating would come from the people. And so this would be just kind of like a popular vote type thing. You go, and we could host this, with the government or something like that, or from some third party that isn't the government, if you want to make sure you have that, separation. And so then the people would then vote to, on each website. It's like, is it factual? Is it biased? If it is biased, left, right, all that other fun things like that. So with that, we would have a rating from the government, a rating from their peers, and a rating from the people. And then when we take those and we kind of average them together, we get an overall generalized rating for that particular media company. And we would make it so that way they are required, whenever they're doing, some sort of coverage like that, just have like a little image up in the corner of the screen. And I kind of had an idea for it. It looks kind of like the recycling symbol, if you've seen like the little triangle thing with the arrows. So it would look like that. So we would have the top half, that would be like from the government, and that would be, a certain color or shade of colors depending on, where they lean. And then you would have one in the bottom corner and then the other corner, and this one would represent the media, this one would represent the people. And then you'd have like a dot in the middle. And the dot in the middle would represent, factual, truthful. So like black would be, like negative, and then white would be positive. Now I know that some people are gonna go, oh, why is it gotta be black and white? We can make it whatever color you want. I mean, those are just 2 that I picked. And so they would be required to show that with, whatever they're doing. And it would just be a little graphic up in the corner. So long as it can be seen, people would understand what it means, and then they would, be able to watch, or, well, this would only work for visual, wouldn't it? I don't know what we would do for audio, like radio shows and stuff like that. I don't know, we'll figure it out, but just a little idea like that. So you have a rating system from the government, from peers, from the people, and then they would be required to show that in some way, form, or fashion. And then when you're watching those shows or listening to those shows, you would know if you're getting, stories that are generally truthful, generally untruthful, if you're watching a left-leaning, media outlet or a right-leaning media outlet. And I think with that, we wouldn't be impeding on free speech at all, which is good. And then it would just be a relatively unbiased, because we're coming from 3 different places, an unbiased way to show how a media outlet is doing. And I think that would help ease a lot of the issues that we're experiencing, I should say, with the media outlets. So that is kind of my idea for that. You guys might disagree. If you do, let me know in the comments. I will be happy to read and respond to as many comments as I can. And then I guess to wrap things up, we'll talk about financial backing. So I do have a Patreon, as I said in the first video. If you do go there and if you would like to support my campaign, please donate only $1. And if ever I go off of what you expect me to do, please feel free to withdraw from your support, because that kind of gives me an indication of how I'm doing, and if I'm meeting your expectations or not. And then another thing I should probably say before we go. All right, so another thing that I should be saying is that a lot of these policies that I'm proposing right now, some of them are based on what I would like to see, but some of the other ones are based on what I'm hearing around me, right? What I'm thinking that the people want. So while I would prefer to see, more conservative type rules and legislation and everything like that, I understand that half the country doesn't agree with that. So in doing that, I'm compromising, and I think compromise is an important factor or an important quality for any president to have. So with this, my views are not set in stone. As I learn more, as I figure out more of what the people want, what the people need, I'll try to figure out a way, to do it first off, and then figure out how to implement it in such a way that it's fair. So, that being said, we have covered taxes, we have covered the military, and we covered the media. So with that, we'll call this video for today. Now I get to do the fun part of editing, which is my favorite. If you can't tell, sarcasm. I'm actually pretty terrible at editing, so I don't know, we'll find out. So thank you again for tuning in. I hope that you will stay tuned and be ready for the next video. All right, thank you.